Are you ready, Madam Clerk? We're going to call this meeting to order before anybody else shows up. We're going to run out of chairs. We're here to work on this recently discovered budget surprise. I want to summarize where we left off, I think, so fellow commissioners jump in if I mess this up. I think we discovered a couple weeks ago that we needed to cut about 3.2, is that correct, Tammy? $3.2 million out of the proposed budget, which was only 1.2 over last year, so we're cutting a couple million out of former budgets. We have identified, the clerk had a list that we had looked at, which I think in the next, today or tomorrow, we need to go through that list and vote on, make sure we've made it clear what we're doing, what we're cutting and not cutting based on her items to consider list that we had. But we had also asked the elected officials to look at what they could trim as a part of getting this down. We've also looked at income increases like the sale of land and things like that. We've looked at using grant money. Those are all one-time fixes. I think we need to reiterate that we still don't feel confident that we have all the numbers and that we're going to have to keep digging after this budget even is approved to figure out where the county is going to be a year from now. So we're not doing this again. It would appear we've inherited a situation that we want to put a stop to, but I've heard several educated guesses that we're dealing with a problem of revenues that were incorrect, that were vastly overestimated revenues, that we've been spending cash, that I think we have heard a lot of stuff, but bottom line, I think the clerk is telling us that now if you do the math correctly, it looks like we are definitely going to have to trim. That being said, I think we also said last time that we did not want to, that protecting what employees we have and not creating a catastrophe and a mass exodus and retraining, that we all have legal duties to accomplish. So we've got to keep that in mind too. Is that about where we're at?
Yeah.
Anything else you'd add to that?
Reiterated.
We're 3.2. We have to cut the budget 3.2 million, and we're raising taxes close to. So it's further away than that.
Well, if we raise taxes 3%, we still have, that leaves us with 3.2.
3.2.
Yeah. So we're increasing taxes, and we're still in the hole. So this is not a problem created by the new budget. This is a problem that's been building, I think we've understood, over the last potentially several years. And it's come to our attention. So now we've got to deal with it. I'm going to start with the elected. I'm going by proximity today. So, Sheriff, you're up first. What have you come up with for ideas for?
Of course, these are just ideas.
Trimming.
So when we were doing our budget process this last time, we tried to get the budget to reflect our actual spending. So there were areas that we did reduce, just to kind of get as accurate as we could to, not ask for too much money in certain areas. So thinning was pretty difficult, to be honest. What we came up with was we can get rid of our reserve officers and just figure out a way to work without them. That is a savings of $57,720. Court security savings about, with insurance, we kind of estimated around $61,000. Of course, I added the VIVA in there. Capital expenses, I removed the lease payments. It all comes to, for the sheriff's budget, $324,300. Same with the jail. The jail, we're over budget in the jail pretty frequently, as it is, and especially with inflation, cost of food and supplies, etc. So we did lose 3 experienced detention staff. So they were 5 to 8 year employees, and replacing them, the wage will be significantly less. So that's a savings of about between 40 to 50,000. We will also get rid of the reserve program for the jail. That's
Cut it in half.
Cut it in half. Sorry. Let me go back. Same with the sheriff's budget, the reserve program. We cut all of patrol's use for reserve, but we left enough money in there to have a reserve dispatch, to pay for at least one reserve dispatch, because when we lose somebody in dispatch, we have so few employees there. It's a huge impact on the operation. So we did leave enough in there to cover one reserve for dispatch. So the jail, we left enough money in there to be able to fund the SLP program.
The posse guy.
Posse guy, it's just one person. And then we just kind of went through the line items to see where we could cut. The total for the jail was $96,600. And the public safety building, there's just nothing to cut. And 911 isn't a part of the county in general. So that's pretty much what we came up with first try.
What happens when you cut reserve officers? Are those the folks patrolling the river?
Yeah, so what'll happen is our full-time reserve, so Spike Angle patrols the river full-time during the summer months, and so we'll lose that. We'll also lose a reserve position for the St. Joe River, so we'll go from 2 deputies on the St. Joe to 1.
And one of them was doing part-time SRO 3 days a week.
That's right, and then we have Mike Groves, who does the SRO program at Kellogg Middle School, and we'll lose that position as well.
So we lose our river patrols, which we've already had lots of concern about having enough police presence. Well, I admire your willingness to cut, but
Cutting our employees is hurting the county. It's just
the
can't be
office
there for the people.
the office position that's the new one that you were
That's
Yeah,
the
talking
new
we
one
just
that
cut
we-
it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Just took that out.
Yeah. Court security leaves us with what to fill the hole?
If there's an emergency at the courthouse, it's whoever is closest. If it's the deputy that's on duty, they'll respond. The response time could be up to 10 minutes, and then or longer, depending. And then if we happen to be at the office, we can come over and assist.
I'm probably most concerned about the reserve officers. Thoughts from the other commissioners on the sheriff's feedback on the sheriff's?
I agree.
Don't think we need to lose those reserve officers.
I agree with you both. I think we should go through and figure out where we're at. The sheriff cut this much, so we need to go through and figure out where we're at to make sure that it's going to be, then maybe we can come back and revisit it.
Okay. So let's just say maybe, and thank you.
Yeah.
But I'd like to look at everything we can do besides affecting our critical services and our employees, if we can first. So.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, our budget is mostly employees, and so everywhere else we haven't been spending crazy this year, and we're at budget or over in a lot of areas just due to expenses, and so cutting there is almost impossible to keep operating.
Okay. And in the old budget, I think you had showed me a revenue item that was 1-point-something million that you thought was erroneous.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, has that removed from the new budget?
Yeah, the projected
Income.
revenue is now 1.3, I think, instead of 2.6.
But is 1.3 reasonable for what you guys really bring in?
So that's an accumulation of splitting some of the stuff that goes to the current expense as well.
In other words, one of the problems that looks like we've had is that our revenues have been over projected. So do you think it's accurate as it sits in the budget right now?
I think it's a lot closer. So I don't know exactly, because some of those things we don't have any control over. That's stuff that comes into the county and then was supposed to be split between the justice fund and current expense. So based off that percentage.
You think we're accurate on their revenue?
I do.
Okay. Any comments from the commission? Questions?
No, not right now.
All right, let's put that on the maybe list. Mr. Prosecutor, thank you for being here. You have a busy schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too have generated some numbers in spreadsheet format for the commissioners. I'll pass those down. My readjusted, or as I've titled them, emergency budget adjustments, do not take into account any cuts to potential benefits or things like VBA, if that's going to be funded from an outside source. So these are strictly line items which are tangible and measurable from my perspective. You'll note that in total there's approximately just under $30,000 in additional cuts that I have identified I can make for the coming year. That's offset by an amount that I don't believe my office would be sustainable adjusting, and that is in the salaries of my salaried employees. And so I have included that in the difference column and adjusted both. From there, the table should be relatively self-explanatory. You're going to see decreases in a number of areas, which I would anticipate, although these amounts should likely be going up, as reflected in my original proposed budget. For purposes of floating the county through, I think that we certainly can get by with one-time adjustments in some of these areas, understanding that we may need to adjust them back up in subsequent years to make up for that. Things such as lost access to training, etc. You look at some of the reduced cost in office supplies, equipment, etc. Once again, that would be identifying things in the coming year, which I think can be shaved and then adjusting those back up in subsequent years. There's a couple of items that I think are not easily identified within the current proposed budget. I'll walk through those just briefly. What the BOCC may have recognized on the current proposed budget is that there is a line for postage which shows nothing actual. That's because that's a drawdown amount or a transfer over that's done by my office toward the end of the year. So even though in the current budget there's 800 budgeted, it reflects actual use percentage of being 0% as of now. My office manager indicates that that's typically drawn over, and she believes we'll need to request 800 because she's almost at 800 currently. Another line item that notably has 0% used is the office equipment item. Typically, my office uses right in the ballpark of what we budget for request every year. I typically try to table that each year toward the end of the year in case there was an emergency expenditure somewhere else. So these are things such as computer upgrades or other equipment which is incidental to the operations of my office. I haven't spent any of that this year so far. I've spent very little waiting for the end of the year to ensure there wasn't an emergency that required me to defer that out. So that number hasn't been adjusted either, as that's anticipated being necessary in the coming years. Otherwise, the rest of the items that I've proposed budget cuts to hopefully are self-explanatory. The one area that I'll point out, which is kind of an elephant in the room, and it's noted on your spreadsheet that you have in front of you as trial prep and expert fees are costs that we anticipate being associated with major criminal offenses. These are not fees or costs that are incurred in every year, and it's difficult to anticipate if and when those will be incurred in any given budget year. Obviously, we've had a number of cases arise recently in Shoshone. We anticipate those costs being necessary. Is there a chance that maybe we might be able to float those costs through somewhere else? Sure. Is there a chance that some of our high-profile cases resolve and potentially all or a majority of that money isn't used? That's also a possibility. It's just really a question mark, so it's very difficult for me to know whether or not that money is going to be used in any given year. And that's why if you look at our historical budgets, those two columns are a number that goes up and down drastically from year to year, and it's difficult to pinpoint or target.
Okay. Well, I sure appreciate your efforts on our county's behalf, and understanding that all of you have legal duties to try to uphold. And we know that things like office supplies are going up for everybody, not down. Questions for the prosecutor or comments?
No.
No, not at this time.
Okay. Madam Clerk, do you have anything?
I do not, I haven't seen it. Can I have a copy? Oh,
Oh, I'm.
thank you.
Okay. All right. Any final comments, Mr. Prosecutor?
For me, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right. I know we have a room full of elected with valuable time, so I'll move along. Jerry, do you have anything you would like to propose? Or that you're...
And I think I speak for the treasurer and the clerk, but when we do our budget, we're very conservative to begin with. So asking to take cuts is very, very difficult. For instance, my motor vehicle department in 21-22, we were at 190,000. This current budget, we're at 138. So that shows we've already taken the cuts there. I have nothing left to cut in motor vehicle whatsoever. I mean, it's bare bones. Appraisal, when we did our 5-year plan, the state came back and said we were one employee short making our goal, but those guys are working hard. We're down to 3.5, where the 5-year plan says we shouldn't have 4.5 employees to do what we do. I could cut my travel by $500, office supplies by $100, copier and fax $750. One of my biggest increases in that budget was building and ground went from $7,900 up to $11,900, which I have no control over. So the other increases were in postage and gasoline, as we know it's gone up. My library reference manuals I cut from $1,800 to $1,500. Postage, we might be able to get by with $1,000 instead of $1,200. Education and registration, we could cut by $500. And last year, lease on our car, if that's paid with the LEPCF funds, that eliminates that. So, capital expenditures, capital outlay, we could cut that. We've never ever used that. I don't know why that's still in there.
How much is that, Jerry?
It was $2,000 each, so a total of $4,000. When it comes to assessor, filing supplies for the copier, the plotter, which we share with Tammy's office. $750, we cut that to $700. Vehicle expenses, because we do have two fairly new vehicles, one last year that we were able to purchase the LATCF fund. We utilize that more. We could cut that from $1,000 to $800. If you took out the expenses of the employees, the wages, their increase in health care, their benefits and stuff, I think all three of my budgets would be pretty damn close to 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think as you look at these other budgets that have had increases and significant increases over the last 2 years, and I'm not naming names or pointing fingers, it'd be easier for them to cut, even though it is warranted. I speak for Carrie. We're bare bones, and I beg someone to show us any different. So when we do our budgets, we're very, very, very conservative.
Well, I thank you for the trims that you came up with. That's several $1,000s out of a already tight budget. I appreciate it. Questions for the assessor or comments?
No.
I wrote down amounts, but I didn't get the line items that he was trimming there. Did you?
I'll be for a copy.
Okay. Any other questions or Tammy, any questions for the assessor? Okay. All right, Treasurer, Madam Treasurer, what have you got? Same problem.
I have a very tight budget to begin with, but we had put in there for temporary employees because of the House Bill 292, not knowing when we're going to get all of our info and if we're going to meet the deadline of having the tax statements mailed out. That's across the state. So we was using last year's amount for employees, not raising it or lowering it, which would have been $12,434. We could probably go down to $7,000. And then postage, I asked for an extra $275. We could go ahead and stay with last year's amount. And then bank charges, that's something that you just don't know from year to year or month to month. If there is going to be anything, do we have to buy supplies? We just don't know. What if we have to change banks? So we've always left $4,000 in there for bank charges, knowing that hopefully we don't have to use it, but we could probably knock that down to $3,500, not knowing.
From where?
4,000 to 35. And then on our LexisNexis searches, I asked for an extra, it was 3%. It went up $66. And that's just because usually every year it goes up 3%, not knowing. I can pinpoint that. I will try to reach out and find out if it's going to go up.
Okay.
And that's pretty much what I have.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for what you're trimming there. And I understand you have some unknowns.
Yes.
Carrie, when it comes to 292,
Any comment from commissioners? I got
Mr.
about
Chair, I've got a
6.
question for our treasurer. You indicated you anticipated being able to cut your postage. Are you currently mailing anything that you're not statutorily obligated to mail?
No, we just have a little bit extra, so
Okay.
from the previous.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
but
I'm not taking away from,
your ability to legally do what you got to do.
yeah. Not unless they raise postage again.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be horrible. That would be nice to keep at the amount that I asked, but
Understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Seeing no more questions. Okay, Madam Clerk, anything on your budget?
So I did make the changes based on last Friday's meeting that we had and came up with savings of $1,058,354. The ones that I did not do, I left the, 27,500 out of the 812 budget. I left that there until we know what we're doing with that. We need to fund it with LATCF or do whatever we're doing with that. I did not make that one. I did not make the one to move the money from property infrastructure and improvement fund, nor the Maverick stuff. I didn't do anything with those two. And as far as my own budgets go, I moved Gail and Karen out of court records into district court to free up money in current expense. And I completed all the changes to remove all the capital budget items out of all departments, as well as leased vehicles, and put those to LATCF, as well as the data infrastructure project, which ended up being $38,500. The other was a possibility with the same project to fund part of that out of SHSP. So it's an either or on that particular one after talking with EJ. I also moved the 5% of the computer arts upgrades, and I removed all the Viva in order to accomplish that total of $1,058,354.
Okay.
I have a copy. Email that one.
Any questions for the clerk?
No, not at this time.
And I will also be looking at my other budgets to see if there's something else I can share.
So I just want to get a handle on what changes you made, since we hadn't really, we looked at your list last time, and I'm trying to find the list of recommended cuts, but I wanted to check off.
Basically the one that I just gave you. The other one. That's what it's itemized, and you guys told me to go ahead with the
So we moved all the capital.
leases and the moves basically to the LATCF. So I've done that to show you what that would be.
So how much of that 1,058,000 is going to be charged to the LATCF? Do you?
They're all marked on there. I didn't actually total it.
Okay.
But
Capital
it's not
budgets.
1 or 1A. It's all 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7.
would be coming out of LATCF.
And I've noted that on each one of
Each
those.
one's got a LATCF next to it.
Right.
Say, so that leaves us with the question of what we want to do with Viva. Move it to LATCF or
Remove it completely.
remove it. That's a good question that I'd just like to throw out to the elected. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how we do this without losing people and pay. Where does Viva stack up in the list of priorities? And this includes department heads too. So, I mean, we've talked about removing it. That's a cost to employees. That's it's just like a pay cut. It's not the same impact as a pay cut, but it is a loss to our employees.
I'm not sure how much savings it is, but back a few years, family and joint used to get 1,000 and single would get 500, and then that was raised to 1,000. I don't know if that could be looked at.
That's a good thing to look at again, what it was before,
It was
without losing it completely.
Yeah.
But
And it was also about when I came that if there were spouses and you're on the same medical plan, it's only one benefit, not both.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, just based on my employees, I think that they're dedicated to the county enough to where if we said, hey, this is something we need to do to get back on track, but we'll bring it back as soon as possible. And if they could see the light at the end of the tunnel, I think they'd be willing to forego it. But it obviously wouldn't be the first choice.
Okay.
From a financial perspective, I think the one thing that maybe some employees just don't recognize, or maybe it's not easily recognizable to the public, is the Viva account allows an employee to really maximize the utility of those funds because you're able to funnel it through the Viva account. So you have the tax savings on that. And so if those are medical bills that an employee is paying out of pocket anyways to cover associated cost of medical expenses, you're able to tack on just throw out a rough number, a 30% add-on on the money that goes into Viva, assuming that you're not also taking advantage of the income investment on those funds while they're sitting idle. And so every employee is going to look at it different. Every employee is going to utilize it differently. I've leveraged Viva personally to my benefit. I've taken my Viva funds, I've pooled them, I've invested them at high risk, I cashed them out at the outset of COVID, and I saved literally thousands of dollars. So if an employee is using it properly, I think it would be a huge benefit. If an employee is not using it, it's just sitting there, maybe it's not as important to them. So I don't know. I think that employee by employee, it might change as far as their perspective on its usefulness. I can speak for my office, and the employees in my office generally utilize that account. How much strategy goes into utilizing it for investment purposes, I think maybe changes on the mindset or knowledge base for investment that an employee has. So I can only speak individually in that regard, but I've leveraged it to my benefit while I've been here.
I think if weighed the option of this will help prevent a major financial, future for the county, I think that's why I think they would be willing to take one for the team like once, but as long as they see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think it's less of an impact than alternative financial savings.
And one of the things is we got to look at is whatever we're paying with, we're going to have to raise taxes next year to cover whatever we cut and whatever we didn't cut. See what I'm saying? So we got to somehow balance that out.
Yeah. Well, this is a multi-stage process. First, we have to cut just to get a budget we can legally pass. And we're cutting, like I said, we're cutting from past mistakes, and it's going to be painful. Then we've got to do the research and figure out how the county got here and figure that out. And the prosecutor and I had a good conversation the other day about looking for alternate sources of revenue, things that we can do there, besides just the property tax that we've been so reliant on. Any other comments from elected or department heads on Viva?
Well, I'd like to see where the LETCF funds are going. I mean, if we're giving them to other taxing entities and we have to cut Viva when it could be funded for 1 year with the LETCF, if we're giving money to those other taxing entities with the LETCF funds that are doing pretty well, that's not fair for our employees to give up their Viva for that. So,
That's a good point. It's,
and if we could fund it with the LETCF funds for 1 year and give them a heads up that, this might be the last year for several years, it might be easier for them to swallow.
and given our current status, I don't envision sharing our LETCF funds much outside the county right now. I think we're going to need that as a part of our long-range recovery.
As do I.
I think we're going to have to.
Let's take a look at the difference of moving that single rate back to 500 too. Let's see if how much that'll lower.
Or you could do that 500 and the rest on the 750 instead of 1,000 too. That would be easier.
It wasn't the single rate, it was part-time.
Part-time.
Part-time rate.
Okay.
It was
Part-time.
single.
Was it
insurance
before
too.
that?
Yep.
Okay.
I
I
didn't know
thought,
that one.
How many years have you
Yeah.
been here now?
I'm on my 19th.
Well, we're trying to ensure there's a 20th, so.
So part-time 500 also, or part-time?
Yeah. on the single. So.
Jess, I had asked the roads to look at, even though you're not a part of the property tax problem right now, I just asked you to look at how we might make sure we're being as thin and responsible as we can, and what have you come up with?
So I wanted to talk about the department that often gets forgotten is the Parks Department, which I also oversee. That is a department that comes out of the pool that is short right now. It's funded by the property tax base. And it's a shoestring budget. There's not a lot besides employees to go around the parks. Our park season is May 10th through September 10th. 7 days a week, 12 hours a day from 8 to 8. As far as cuts beyond what we could do with employees or operating hours, there's really nothing. I mean, there's just a hair over $11,000 to operate 2 parks. That's water, sewer, power, everything. I mean, most of that is eaten up by everything but employees. What we could consider doing, and it would be completely up to the board. There's a couple of options we could do to trim some money in that department. We could keep the parks the same, and we could decrease a couple of line items. It's really only gonna result in about $1,350 of savings. So kind of a drop in the bucket. The next option would be to alter the park's hours and the days that they're open. We can still keep May 10th through September 10th. We did run some reports on the busiest days for reservations and park usage. We could cut it down to 4 days a week. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are the heaviest use days. And the parks would just be closed and locked Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. That would allow us to go from 4 employees, which we cannot operate with less than 4 employees, down to 3 employees, 1 full-time at Gene Bay Park, 1 full-time at West Shoshone Park, and then a floater, which would split their time 20 hours at one park, 20 hours at the other park, to kind of help with the mowing. We do lock the parks at night. We've had huge issues with vandalism, so I think leaving them open and unlocked is not an option, but somebody has to physically go to the park and open it up when we're open, and go to the park and close the park when we're closed. That would give us a $16,825 decrease in the overall parks budget that could be used to offset some of the other cuts.
By cutting hours.
By cutting hours at the park, but that would mean that the park would go from being open 7 days a week to 4 days a week. And we would be willing to look at that, hopefully shorter term for a year or 2 rather than long term, because the park, we already get a lot of feedback from the community that the parks aren't open enough anyways. We don't open them early enough, we don't close them early enough, but we just don't have the money coming in, we don't have the revenue coming in to support any longer than that. Parks used to be open about a month longer total in the year, and as the budget cuts came down the line, they were trimmed in the Parks Department. But that is, it's not going to solve any problems, but it is, a little bit that could help towards the rest. That would be something that the board would need to decide it would be a big change in what the public's used to with parks operations, but it would be doable. And then as far as the road department, Dave came down and filled me in after the meeting, and I watched the video. My department, fortunately, for us, is not one that the revenue is. Revenue looks good for our department, and it has for a few years. The revenue, the SRS funds are guaranteed through fiscal year 2025. We just have two revenue sources, and we don't levy for property taxes. There were some discussions in Thursday's meeting about possibly using the LATCF to pay for leases and capital. And Lance had brought up, and I agree with what he had brought up in the meeting, that I don't know that would be the best use to pay those fees for 1 year in my department when it's not going to help the total problem with the other deficit. My revenue is strong. My projected revenue from the state is a couple $100,000 more than what my budget ask is. So I don't know that should be a consideration, for the board to use LATCF funds
Paying leases
to offset anything in my department, because it's not going to help. I'd rather see the money go towards other departments when right now my revenue is strong. One thing that President White had brought up was, maybe we should look at doing something like that for, to make sure that we're sitting in a good cash situation, because the SRS funds aren't always guaranteed, and they're like on a 2-year basis. So that's where the bottom has fallen out for my department historically. I asked Tammy for a current cash accounting for my road fund, because what comes into my department can't be used in other departments and should be kept separate. And after my budget year closes with what I've looked, that we're looking like we're going to end out for the end of our season this year, we're still going to have $3 million in our cash reserves. The least amount that I would be comfortable in my cash reserves is 1 year of the SRS, which is about $1.6 million. And right now we'll be sitting with a cash reserve of approximately $3 million. So if that number is true, then I'm comfortable with the state of my department right now. That being said, I did take a look at if we wanted to look at conservative spending for the next year or two, in the event that that's not the case, that the cash amount isn't true. There are some areas that we could look at making some cuts. Starting this year, to bolster our cash until things shake out and we look at things and see where we're sitting. We have 2 projects that were kind of pushed off, and we were going to be pushing to get them done before the end of fiscal year. We had a large striping job, which we were budgeted for $50,000 for, and we haven't done our chipping for the year yet. A lot of that was pushed off by the delay of all of our workforce being brought to the bridge. So I would feel comfortable that would save $150,000 in my fiscal budget this year. It goes back into my road account, can't be used by another department. So just to make sure that there's a little bit of a cushion. And then, we could cut one temporary winter position. We're budgeted for 6. We have a hard time filling those positions for lack of applicants. So temporarily for a year or 2, I could cut out one position. That would save $13,912, and that money would just kind of, the revenue would come in, but it would sit in our cash account. We could cut out some smaller line items like lodging. There's $800 for lodging. That would pretty much be for me to go to any conferences, and I would just cut that out and not go to any conferences. We can make a small minimal cut on cleaning supplies, a $2,000 cut on shop tools. We've got a couple of line items that were pointed out that aren't used every year, but they're there in the event that you need to use them. We've got an erosion control line item that often goes unspent, and that's $5,000 that would look a little better on our bottom line. you know, if we really were looking, depending on where you guys think we're sitting and how much you feel like we need to cut, we could cut our chip oil line down to half. That just means we're gonna do half the work. But that is something that we can look at doing. So there are a few areas that we could cut, you know, if you need me to. But I do want to point out that there were 3 errors in our final budget when I printed off the final worksheet that were discussed in our workshop that weren't reflected in the final budget worksheet. And so that was the diesel, or the heavy equipment repairs. You know, we were at 85,000, and then we had discussed in that last budget workshop that we were going to take what we were going to save in our diesel line item and put that into the heavy. And so that would result in an increase of $28,000. And that is one that I would like to see that increase stay, just for the fact that we have deferred maintenance, we have equipment that is broken down and will remain broken down until the start of next fiscal year, and we've got to get it up and running. The other one is the lubricants line. We have been budgeted for $25,000 every year. We've spent $25,000 every year, and at the final budget, I think it was just a typo. It came out as being $20,000. So that was a $5,000 cut that wasn't intended. And the price of lubricants is up 30%. So I feel that that one needs to go back at $25,000. The other one that was discussed was the mileage for the commissioners for travel, to be increased by $1,000 for mileage reimbursement, and that one wasn't reflected on the budget sheet. If we're looking at cuts, I think the reason that that was cut out of our budget before when I did some checking is that the board, when they would make their trips over to the St. Joe, would use one of the airport courtesy vehicles and fuel up at the shops rather than take their personal vehicle and then get reimbursed on the mileage. So whatever the board would like to do, you know, with that.
Okay. I think we're running out of courtesy vehicles at this point,
Running
though.
out of courtesy vehicles. So if you'd like that to stay in, I'm happy to have that stay in, and my revenue projections would support that to stay in at the 1,000.
Right. Well, you're a little different in that you're not going to help us much with that
No.
3.2 million. But
if I could, I would. You know, we have the only thing that there's 2 line items that help from my department. That's the administration cost and the building and grounds. Those are the 2 that come from my department and go back into.
How much did you pay in admin,
So the admin.
or what's budgeted?
So the budgeted amount for the admin cost, the approved amount is this coming year, this fiscal year we're currently in, $278,860. Fiscal year 24, the approved budget amount is $342,621.
For admin?
For admin. So that equates to 8.14% of my total bottom line budget goes to the admin cost.
Is that
Last
something you
year
and Peggy
it
have
was
increased?
7.1.
Did you increase all departments to the same number? Or?
We took up some of them, and it was because of the 9% medical increase. That's why we did that. We shared that cost, so it's not
So
it's shared just by current expense and the elements. And then we also did the same thing with buildings and grounds. We've not raised rent in many years, from $7,500 for some up. The district court took the biggest hit of that.
But are we now charging her the same percentage for admin as the sheriff, as the prosecutor?
Not the sheriff, and the prosecutor doesn't pay admin. The only ones that pay admin are district court pays some admin, appraisal, roads, solid waste.
The sheriff's department?
Sheriff's department pays some, yes. Not as much.
Any questions for Jessica or comments from the board?
No.
Do you want to explain a little bit more what the admin fee, it goes back into the county?
The admin fee is just to support all the functions that current expense departments provide to the other departments. So it's legal services, it's building and grounds, support,
Insurance.
it's insurance, liability insurance, it's the payroll, human resources, accounts payable and receivable support, BOCC support.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, can I
go ahead.
pose a point of inquiry? I'll preface it with saying that I hate to open my mouth without having first done my research, but in the interest of expediency, I'll do so. I'm aware of a number of counties around the state who outsource legal representation for certain civil matters specifically. And here in Shoshone, our prosecuting attorney's office really handles all of that in-house, and we provide legal guidance to departments such as our Public Works and Roads Department. I was speaking recently with a firm that contracts with one of our counties in the 1st District here in North Idaho, and that firm, all they do is just the representation for roads. Since our county doesn't do that, and since our budget for our public works and our roads is healthy, and our budget otherwise is not as healthy, would there be any way, Madam Clerk, at all, to maybe carve that into our public works and roads' budget and have that money transferred back over to help offset those costs that in-house we're providing for legal services for
I
that
have no
department?
idea to figure out what that would be. I have no clue.
Pros and cons. Again, we're taking it out of one pocket, paving roads to put it in another, but I see your point. Yeah. There must be some formula the other counties are using to.
And I'm not aware of any county that's transferring the money from one budget. They're just going out and hiring an outside firm.
Mm-hmm.
So that firm's, sending a bill to the county for $20,000 for doing roads legal representation, and the county's just paying that bill to an outside firm, and your county prosecutor isn't bearing that workload. But since we are handling it in-house, it begs the question, if we've got one budget that's healthy, and we're taking from another budget to provide that service.
Yeah.
It's just a thought. And I haven't chatted with Jess about it either. I mean, I'm just speaking on the spot, so.
Okay. Have we heard from all the elected now? I think we have. Okay. Well, that's worth thinking about, Mr. Prosecutor. I'm trying to think of the next logical step. Some of these, I think we would need the commissioners, I guess, need to go back and say, do we want to go ahead and look at these offers of cuts from the elected right now and make decisions? Or do you want time to consider?
I want time to consider.
Like time to consider as well.
Okay.
We need to figure how much we're towards our goal of the 3.2 million.
Well, if you count the 2 point whatever in revenue that we expect from land sales, and we take this 1,058,000 off there, we're probably there. I'm rough estimating. Is that what you would say as well?
Yes, and I think that the other departments that have not, they don't come under like roads. And I spoke to Mike Smith, and he came up with some cuts in his budget as well. I don't know if anybody's talked to disaster services, planning and zoning, solid waste.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to solid waste.
I don't know if they have any or not. I haven't heard anything from any of those departments.
Well, both commissioners are wanting time to consider. What were you going to say before I cut you off?
I'm really concerned about cutting anything for the employees or employees, period, because we're struggling to keep up service to our county to begin with. And this, if we can find other ways to do that, that's what I'd like to look at.
Well, I think we're very close in cuts, but of course this is a one-time solution, and we've got to make it clear this time it's somebody else's fault. If we pass this budget and we don't fix the problem, next year it'll be our fault that we're in this fix. We're still going to have, there's not going to be $2 million in land sales next year and all the things we're using to rescue this thing. So we're going to have to take a hard look at that. But I'm prepared to discuss a couple items. Like right now, I'm not happy with the idea of cutting our reserve officers. At the same time, I'm getting calls from people wanting more law enforcement in the county. That's a concern for me. And you guys have said that you want some time to consider that, and we have another meeting tomorrow, so we can bring that up there. But I'll just voice my concern right now that I would like to do this with as minimum impact on the employees as we can, and minimum impact on the taxpayers who are paying a tax increase to see us cut. I mean, we're raising taxes next year, and in fact providing less service, like talking about cutting the parks or something. So I'm going to pay 3% more in property tax, whatever, and get less service. So we've got to be very careful. Many of you have come up with cuts that I don't think the average citizen would notice as much. I appreciate that. I'm concerned about the employees and morale. We did this 30 years ago when I was commissioner, and Bunker Hill went down on my second or third week on the job and left us in this situation. And we cut pay, and the reverberations took years to get back. We lost momentum, and so that's a concern. I think we're very close to the 3.2 right now, but I think Commissioner Zimmerman's expressed, I think our concern is how confident are we in the numbers, and exactly where we are. So I guess I'm going to recommend to the commission that we adjourn today, talk to the other departments that we haven't talked to. We have a meeting on the books for tomorrow, don't we, Madam Clerk? What time's that?
I have to look. I think there's an agenda right there. I think it's 9:30.
Oh, thank you for putting those right where I asked you to. At that point, I would ask the commission that we be ready to answer the elected on some of these cuts that they have offered, and ready to commit to what Tammy has adjusted. I mean, she's already made some adjustments that we talked about, but I think we need to go down the list and commit yes or no, make a decision on VEBA, if we're going to move that to LETCF or we're going to reduce that benefit, or what we're going to do. I kind of like the assessor's idea of maybe going to 500 and 750 and using VEBA or something to cover it this time and give employees a year to. I'd like to soften the blow on the employees, and that's just common sense, because it costs a fortune to replace people, and we lose talent, and we lose training. So
I just want to make sure that we're whatever we pay for now, we're going to end up raising taxes for next year. So I want to make sure that we have enough, so that we're not in the same boat. So that's what I want to, make sure that it's going to happen.
So we have a budget meeting on the schedule for tomorrow at 10:30 to take action on these things. And I suspect we're going to have to put one in for later in the week to make final decisions, because if I recall, Madam Clerk, you wanted
By Tuesday,
By the 29th.
tomorrow.
by tomorrow. Okay. And I think we're still partly in the dark on some of this. We still don't know exactly how the county got here. That's my biggest concern. We could use land sales and grant money and cover this, but where will we be next year without land sales and grant money?
That's right.
Commissioner, are we still moving forward with an audit of?
We have asked, and you want to update us on what you've got going?
I asked the controller to help out. And they
State
said they
controller.
would. The state controller, they just look at it. I don't know how far they're gonna dig into it. But I believe we need to get an auditor, an outside auditor. We have the funds to do it. I think we need to, if this is public funds, we need to know what happened. And, we're having to cut a lot of wages. So I want to make sure that, not wages right now, but I want to make sure where we're at. We don't know exactly where we're at right now.
So I think it's imperative that we get outside help to help us as a board be very clear. Yes, you've been overinflating your revenue, or yes, you've been spending your cash, or I think we all just want to be real firm on what created the problem. And then I talked with the prosecutor a little bit and just brainstorming. I think the elected are going to have to come together, and we're going to have to work on creative ideas of other types of revenue. I said it before, I think we need to figure out how to start to create some income from our visitors to this county that take up so many resources from property tax dollars, that require so much extra law enforcement and solid waste and everything else. And so I think we need to look at income. I think we need an auditor or an expert help to clarify what the county's been doing wrong and stop doing it. And I think we probably need to conserve some of our LETCF money to continue to help us step down. I understood from the sheriff that employees have been watching these meetings and they're worrying about their jobs. Does the commission want to address that right now? I think we're not talking about cutting people yet. And I don't think we're talking about salary cuts yet. I think we can use our cushion to get through those things. But I think Tammy said to me a while back, it may be that over the past they've committed to the county spending more than they take in, which we all know what would happen at our house if that happened.
It catches up with you, which
It catches up. Now all the savings is gone, and now we're spending more than we're taking in. So we're going to have to figure out how to spend less or take in more. That seems to be the simple math of it. But we got to be accurate. We can't just inflate income just so we have permission to spend. We've got to be careful about that. Did I quote you correctly on that? You said a lot of things, but I think that's one of our concerns. So, all right. Is there anything else from the commission?
No.
I'm going to open it to public comment. That should be interesting and fun for the press. So we'll just start over here with the oldest living pine cricker.
Well, it was brought up about the audit. If you guys remember, I think it was the second or first meeting you guys had here, I mentioned something about should be a third-party audit. And I was told, I think Tammy mentioned it, that there is an auditor. Well, apparently that auditor, whoever you had, was not doing his job, because this wouldn't be such a surprise. So, but it sounds like you guys are trying to work on that. You have inherited a big mess that really does not seem to be any of your fault. So I hope when he does a story in the newspaper that he brings that up. And as far as, like Holly says, about the law enforcement, I would have to agree with you, Dave, that probably, we can't hardly cut that. That's just a necessity. No way around that I see. I mean, we're kind of shorthanded in that department already, it seems like. I don't know where you're going to go with the cuts. I mean, it's a tough deal here. But like you said, you don't want to be in this mess next year again. So
then it will be our fault.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So,
Ma'am?
Actually the same. We was talking at home about that one, and it is really important so we get an outside auditor in. And we cost money, but we need invested money so that it's not happen again. And we need to find the root where it's coming from.
Spoken like a practical German.
Thank you.
Bitteschön.
Thank you.
My turn.
Matt,
For your sheriff, for the reserve officers, if you guys would split the Title III money up, which should have go to her, would probably cover the reserve officer instead of all giving it to the wildfire fund. So, changing the benefits from 20 hours to 30 hours, which your sister counties are 30 hours before you get benefits. And I guess my last comment is you're putting 2.1 in this budget from the Maverick sale. Do you guys really think that you're going to get 2.1 more revenue next year? Because you're going to be in the same boat again.
Mm-hmm.
The lettuce money is great, but it puts you in the same boat again. You can pay all your bills, but then next year you're in the same boat. So cuts are inevitable. I mean, I wouldn't think you're going to make up 2.1 next year in revenues.
No.
So
I agree.
I mean, I'm not pointing fingers anymore. I'm trying to figure out the problem too, and what's the best solution. You have the money. It just, you've got to make sure you're going to do the steps right to get to the end goal. And that's the hard part. And honest to truth, I mean, salary and wages are the the biggest thing in your budget. I just don't see any way you're not going to be able to touch them. I mean, that's just my opinion. And they are tough to take. 1987, Sunshine told us $2 an hour cut or don't come back to work. We had to take it. Or you didn't come back. So, I mean, nobody likes it. But we're not in the boat anymore to fight over stuff or like this. But anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you. Anything else, Madam Clerk? Madam Clerk, Madam Treasurer. Stutsky. Anything else, Jerry?
If you're looking at raising revenue from an outside area, you need to start the conversation with your legislature to get them to do a local option.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
I mean, it's very, very limited of how you can raise revenues under this current legislation. So,
We used to have that. Kootenai County did a local option to build the jail, and now they took that off the table. That would be something if we could do that.
Right. Clerk. Mr. Prosecutor, any final comments? Under Sheriff, any kind of comments? No. Sheriff?
Yes. So when Under Sheriff and I came up with what we could cut, that, for the record, that is our pretty much worst case scenario. So if there's any possible way we'd be able to save the reserve program, that would be a priority for us. It's a huge impact for us, and they're a major part of our team that do a lot of the workload. So thank you.
Totally agree.
Yes.
Any final comments? Okay. Josh, any questions or comments? Well, we can do questions after, but comments?
No, I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Anything else from the board?
No.
Sydney, I never asked you. Do you have any comment? Okay. All right. Seeing that, we're going to adjourn for today. We're going to take this back up tomorrow at 10:30.